moving forward, want to make sure that we get a good amount of detail and a good amount of depth into the Crusades because this is really the transformative event in European history from this time period. So, as we're approaching 1000 CE, Viking raids are slowing down. Political and economic stability is increasing, right? Some of the early modern states are starting to appear, the early France, early Great Britain. Spain is still mainly controlled by Muslims by this point. But as stability grows, Western Europe begins to look outward at the rest of the world. They begin to look for reconnection, reintegration into the rest of Eurasia. And so the outlet for this comes in 1095 when the Byzantine emperor requests aid from the Pope in Rome. And the Roman Catholic Church seizes on this opportunity to expand its power, not only politically, not only in terms of its wealth and its land, but to also demonstrate its greatness and its superiority to declining Byzantium and the Eastern Orthodox Church. And so the Roman Catholic Church declares a holy crusade to liberate the city of Jerusalem from Muslim control. And so over the next 300 years, different groups of powerful lords and even kings in Western Europe organized military expeditions to not only the Holy Land, but as well to other parts of the non-Christian world. Now, crusading in the Holy Land in Jerusalem is essentially a failure. The First Crusade experiences some mild success, for a number of reasons, not the least of which being, essentially the element of surprise. The Muslim community at that point is divided between Sunni and Shia. There's competition for political control in the Abbasid Caliphate, and different cities within Arabia and the Middle East are, you know, so ingrained in their dislike for each other that in some cases they actually ally with the Christian Crusaders against other Muslim cities. So the First Crusade does see some success. The Crusaders capture several very important cities in the Holy Land, including Jerusalem, and they set up miniature, what we call Crusader kingdoms, basically, centered around major Middle Eastern cities. Um, Now, eventually, the Muslims under Saladin pushed them out after about 120 years of control. And there are more crusades to the Holy Land, I think 12 in total, all of which are varying levels of failures. However, the idea and the concept of crusading does not fade. Um, it is picked up in Spain in the Reconquista, which is Spanish Christians' series of wars against the Moorish Muslims in southern Spain to eventually push Islam out of Spain and make it Christian again. There are also crusades against the remaining pagans in Western Europe, as well as Jews, all in the name of expanding, the empire of Christ, also known as Christendom. So this map kind of gives you an idea of the early Crusades and, their modest success, which at the end of the day doesn't really have a whole lot of political influence because by the end of the Fourth Crusade, all of the land is back under Muslim control and never really leaves Muslim control after that point. Now, I want to make sure that we get into kind of the causation of the Crusades because this is a favorite topic in terms of the AP exam. Um, Again, I highly recommend that you watch the crash course episode on this because John Green gets into this in quite a bit of depth. Again, I don't fully agree with his take on it. I think that there are some more secular and basic motivations behind the Crusades, but it's definitely a good perspective for you guys to watch and listen to. So, in terms of the causes of the Crusades, obviously religious zeal is at the top of the list. This idea that this was a mission from God. The proclamation from the Pope, who is literally seen as God's voice on earth, essentially justifies this military expedition, which, if you look into the detail of the Crusades, is incredibly savage and brutal. The Christian Crusaders spill quite a bit of blood in their holy quest. And, part of that is because of the promises of forgiveness that are given by the Roman Catholic Church at the outset of the Crusades. Now, in terms of some more basic motivations that probably also play a role here, you also have the practice of primogeniture in Western Europe, meaning that all wealth and all land passes on to the eldest son. So, what you have in Western Europe at this point are several generations of second and third sons who essentially have been passed over for land and power, and they are in search of their own lands and their own way to, essentially stake their claim. At the same time, you have the aspirations of the Roman Catholic Church itself, wanting to expand its influence, wanting to expand its power, especially at the expense of the Eastern Orthodox Church. You have this concept of Christendom, this idea of an all Christian empire that would span, multiple continents, similar to the way that the Islamic Caliphate was built. You also have just simply economic opportunity, plunder. A lot of Christian crusaders took advantage of the Crusades to enrich themselves through looting, through engaging in slave trade of captured Muslims. You also have just open xenophobia, which I believe is on that summer vocabulary. So if you don't know what it is, make sure that you look it up. But in Western Europe, there is a pretty high level of ignorance of what Islam actually is, as well as fear of Islam. Remember, Western Europe is essentially barely saved from the clutches of Islam at the Battle of Tours. And the ignorance of the Islamic faith and, the view of Muhammad as a false prophet, the dislike of Islamic belief that, Jesus was not the Son of God, all of this contributes to this kind of overwhelming and somewhat irrational fear of Islam as like the mortal enemy of Christianity. And last but not least, crusading to the Holy Land opens up trade opportunities. It opens up opportunities for Europeans to reconnect with those major trade networks and bring goods into Western Europe that they haven't had access to essentially since the fall of the Roman Empire. Now, much more important than the causes are the effects of the Crusades. First and foremost, even with the failures of the Crusades, this allows Western Europe to begin reintegrating itself into the rest of Eurasia and, more importantly, into those major trade networks. It introduces numerous trade goods to European markets, Chinese gunpowder, Chinese printing technology, Indian cotton, Indian spices, salt and gold from West Africa, perfume, carpet, incense from Arabia. So the reintroduction of these trade goods into European markets creates a massive demand for more interaction with the rest of Eurasia. Now, one of the other things that it does, and this is going to have big implications when we start talking about the Renaissance, is the Crusades also reintroduce Greek rationalism, Arab science, Indian mathematics, and Chinese technology to Western Europe. And this is going to create a revolution in thought, a revolution in economics, revolution in production and science within Western Europe, which is going to give birth to the period that we know as the Renaissance. One of the other effects of the Crusades, probably intended, was that the Crusades were a very strong cultural unifier. The Crusades presented Christianity, at least Western Christianity, with a common enemy, and that was Islam. And what this does is this helps to divert attention away from the political squabbles and small scale wars going on in Western Europe. And it brings a moderate amount of peace to Western Europe as these newly forming states focus their attention on this new common enemy rather than focusing their attention on fighting one another. Another side effect of the Crusades is that it actually kills off several generations of European lords, which allows larger, wealthier lords to begin consolidating their land. And this leads to the formation of early modern states. France, for example, was founded under the Capetian dynasty through exactly this method. As powerful lords went off to fight in the Crusades and, essentially left their lands unprotected or left their lands in a weakened state, larger, more powerful lords were able to either purchase or seize those lands. And this is the beginnings of those early modern European states. Another really important side effect of the Crusades is, even though it allows for a short resurgence, the Crusades actually weakened Byzantine power in Anatolia. And the Fourth Crusade, in particular, actually destroys the capital of Constantinople. The Crusaders of the Fourth Crusade make their way to Constantinople via Italian merchants from the cities of Venice and Milan, and they reach Constantinople assuming that the Byzantine emperor, who has invited them, is going to help them pay off their debts to these Italian merchants that transported them to Constantinople. And when they arrive, the Byzantine emperor essentially shuts the gates and leaves them outside, basically for lack of a better term, telling them to go home. And so the Crusaders turn their anger and their violence on Constantinople. They surround and break into the city and then spend about 4 days looting and burning it. So this just goes to kind of magnify the epicness of the failure of the Crusades, that the most violent and most um, tragic victory of the Crusades was not Christian crusaders recapturing, the holy city from Muslims once and for all, but it was Western Christians attacking, burning, and looting the most powerful Eastern Christian city in the world. And then finally, in terms of one of the effects of the Crusades, because the Crusades don't only affect Europe, they have a very big impact on the Muslim world. The Crusades definitely weaken the power and the authority of the Abbasid Caliphate, which allows the Mongols to sweep into Baghdad in 1258 and utterly destroy the caliphate. The caliph himself is put to death by the Mongols. And what this does is this breaks the control that Arab people have had over the caliphate and Islam for since its beginning. And this clears a path for a different ethnicity, the Turks, to become the dominant entity within Islam.